So, we just shot a video about Christian meditation. What is Christian meditation about? And so I think that covered basically the great big overview of the Christian stages of spirituality and also the approach to Christian meditation, which is different than other kinds of meditation from Eastern systems. And that's very important to know, especially for people that believe in Jesus. If you have a relationship with Jesus, you want a meditation system that is built on his teachings and that is geared towards his teachings and that is nestled within the grace of God and the grace of Christ. Now, we're talking about real powers here. These are not words. We're definitely not just trying to be theologically accurate. You can't do that because that's not what the Bible says. We're not doing that. These energies that the Bible tells us about really do exist. And they exist in the character and the way that Scripture describes them, and that is, amplified and further fleshed out in Christian mystical tradition. So there are very real powers that are coming off of God. What Jesus accomplished in salvation, that is not just language. That's not words. It's not a metaphor. What Jesus did when he accomplished salvation is exposed us to an energy, right, that really exists, and that energy is grace. So we're not coming in through skill, we're not coming in through good karma, we're not coming in solely through our own efforts. We really are opening ourselves to God's grace and power, a free gift of power. So Christian meditation is about accessing this free gift of power. And this free gift of power is not something you have to earn. It's not something that through skill you have to climb to. This is something that really is for free that you can soak up. And so it would make sense then that if you have Christian meditation, it would be different from Eastern forms of meditation in various ways. If there really is a different approach, and if there really is a different power that's being accessed, then the unfolding is going to be different, and that's just what you find. So what I want to say about Christian meditation today is, the other video is, what is it about? Let's just talk about what it's like to experience Christian meditation now. And this is going to be possibly the trickiest video. I want to make it clear that I do provide spiritual direction to people via phone or video call, because I think when you're really talking to a person about where they're at spiritually and what's happening in their meditation, a lot of times a generic answer is not the answer. You tell one person this, you tell one person this. You tell people different things based on where they're at. So I'm going to give a general overview here, but for specific direction, you're probably going to need to speak to an actual person who's qualified to help you on that, to discern what's going on in your prayer life. But for general purposes, let's just say this, the first difference I would say that I would want to talk about that's different about Christian meditation is posture. There are just no postural requirements at all. There are none. Some people I know lie down. Now, seeing people for over a period of 20 years practicing it, it's a very small percentage of people that can get in deep while laying down. Because you're really not trying to go to sleep. You're trying to not go into sleep, an actual sleep state. But Christian prayer and meditation has sleep-like states. And for me and for most people, laying down means that when you get to that fork in the road to go to a sleep-like state instead of a sleep state, actual sleep, laying down for most people makes it more likely you end up in a sleep state instead of a sleep-like state. So that's the first reason why laying down maybe isn't suggested, but there are exceptions. I know 2 or 3 people that can get in really well laying down. So, but I can't, and most people I know cannot. But for most people, the best position is like on a couch or a nice, comfortable chair that you would find in someone's living room. You want to be nestled in comfort, basically. You want to be in a very relaxed posture. You certainly are not going to straighten your spine, get your hips under you, put your hands up in some kind of posture like this. None of this is got anything to do with Christian prayer. What you want to do is be comfortable. So what I like to be in a reclining chair with my feet up and my back at maybe a 40-degree angle or 35-degree angle. So, something like this, something like that. I like that because then my head can fall forward and it's still somewhat erect. It's not putting a lot of pressure on my neck. And I also, this curved feeling in my body, I think that's a little womb-like. I think that's like what it was like in the womb. And it just, for me, that's the posture that really feels like I can find a deep humility and a deep surrender. And remember that surrender and letting go is the most important quality for Christian meditation and prayer. It's not being alert. Being highly alert can actually really stand in the way of receiving this free power of grace that God is giving. And that's you can't overstate that enough. Christian religion and Christian theology are not just words. They're just not. And it's a profound error to think as a non-Christian that when you hear these words being said, it's a profound error to think, oh, I'm experiencing that in my own prayer life. We just call it this. That's an error, for sure. Now, there are similarities. We wouldn't want to say they're so different. They're not cousins or friends. We're all friends. But Christian meditation is different, and it is very different. And it is different because there really is a loving God who knows and cares about you, and who feels that it is its job to draw you into itself. That's the way this God works. And so the goal with Christian meditation is not to master one's mind. It's not to master some mystical state of consciousness. None of that is the goal. The goal is to surrender deeply enough and rest deeply enough that you become more receptive to these energies that are actively being shown down on you. And that's the point. It's not just a cosmic energy that is always shining, although that is true too. But it's not just a cosmic energy that's always shining. It's an energy that for that day, they have decided to shine upon you. For that moment, right? Which is part of a scheme of waking your soul up. It's part of a plan that is in action from the Holy Spirit in your soul. And that's true. And that's not a metaphor, and that's not just language for something that you find everywhere else. It's actually what is happening. And so that's a different thing altogether, and that's why the approach is so different. Because you're just trying to accept God's grace and allow it to deeply enter and penetrate into your soul. And this isn't a mastery of something. So it's a lulling into a rest state. And so the first stage of meditation, now we're just talking experience, and I just want to describe it. So, it's usually pretty noisy mind. And you could be quite distracted, and you're just trying to stay focused on your prayer. And you're getting distracted quite often, but you're coming back. And you're getting distracted quite often, but you're coming back. And if that stage goes on for a long time, then you won't notice that you're progressing in your meditation. If it goes on for a few months, let's say 6 months, then you're not going to notice that it's getting slowly quieter and more receptive and more peaceful during your meditation time. What you're going to notice is a change in your life as a result of sitting and doing this, even though this feels like it's really not working very much. This is what you see all the time. People are sitting down to pray and meditate daily, twice a day, 20 minutes, and they're never missing. But their mind is never still. They have not yet entered a deep state of rest with God in any way. And yet, even though that hasn't happened, in their life, you begin to see these changes, right? There's this stability or this peace or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. But the person doing this practice begins to see, my life is different, very different. It's changed. And the only thing that's different is I'm showing up for prayer and meditation that feels like it isn't working. And that's kind of what it's like at first. Your will is sitting there. Your mind may be getting quite distracted, and your will could even get off track now and then. But the reason you're sitting there in prayer and meditation is to absorb God's power. And because of that, you are absorbing God's power. And you might not be good at meditation. You might be, for various reasons, you feel like for you it's not a success. But it doesn't really matter because it's God floating around you, right? You're sitting in this sea of God, and it's soaking its powers into you in various ways for whatever opportunities arise within your soul for it to come in. That's what's going on. And so that first stage of just disorder, various stages of profound disorder, if it's extreme, then it's absolutely uncomfortable. And there is even a place at which it would be better for that person to pray instead of try to meditate. This trying to get a still mind, right? Trying to just use a word over and over to still one's mind. I've noticed in certain people, there's a certain level of disorder that is too great for that practice. That practice can a little bit backfire, and the disorder becomes greater, but not in that good way that it's greater until it lessens, but in this way that it's maybe even slightly traumatizing. This is quite an extreme thing. Most people should really just try to use the same phrase over and over, or repeat the word over and over. It's almost everyone should do that, but there are some extreme outliers that would be better off praying for 20 minutes twice a day instead, until their soul was brought into a deeper place of peace, and the more direct attempt at entering a contemplative state could take place. So that's what it's like in the beginning. Disorder for everybody, just different degrees of it. And then it begins to calm. And I'm just making these, I'm not really trying to define them in numbers, exact, precise stages. I'm just going to describe the flow. I would say the next stage that is noticeable is your mind is still thinking, but there's more empty space between the thoughts. Or it seems as if a depth opens up and you close your eyes and you look and you see this darkness, right? And colors and things. And it's a certain depth. If you just took the time right now to do it, you'd notice if you close your eyes, there's just a certain depth there. It's how deep it is. But you're thinking still. You've got mind activity going on, and you're thinking, and yet there's this certain depth there. And at another level, as that disorder quiets, and you go further in, that mind screen, that depth that you're seeing before you with your eyes closed, gets deeper. And the noise is still there, the thought is still there, but the thought gets quieter too, or there's less of it. And that's a wonderful place to be. It's not, you wouldn't say I'm meditating deeply yet. No one who hits that stage would come out and say, I have hit deep meditation. But it is somewhat satisfying. There is this sense of satisfaction that you have traversed and made some kind of progress. You can feel that. You wouldn't say you're feeling God's energies necessarily either, but you would definitely say something has changed, and it just feels a little more peaceful. The more poetic would be able to describe it better than the less poetic. But something is there. There's been this shift, and things are a bit quieter. And then the next stage I would describe after that is you're still not, I wouldn't say your mind is silent, but it is much quieter now. Now you would definitely say my mind has gotten a lot quieter in this meditation period, or if it's what's happening generally speaking for you, you'd say my mind is really quieted down. And this stage, you would even maybe start to assign some of the sensations you're feeling to God's presence. It may, in this stage, feel like you've subtly been wrapped in something. Many people talk about being wrapped in a blanket, a warm, dark blanket. Very often they'll say a warm, dark blanket. And when I say dark, try not to use the Western light darkness sort of schema because that doesn't describe it. In this case, think of darkness as when you turn out the lights to go to sleep, and that how enveloping and peaceful and restful that darkness is. Because we turn the lights off to go to sleep. Most people want it dark to sleep. That darkness is what you're wrapped in. And it's like a warm blanket. And you may still have some thoughts going on, but in this stage, they're off in the distance. They're happening. You can notice them, but it's more like you're here, you're back here somewhere under or above, it depends. But wherever that thought is taking place, it's not where you are. You can still hear it, but you're not right in it. You may be next to it, or you may be a ways behind it or under it. And it really does seem like that. Those thoughts are going off in the distance. And this is you leaving your mind, the brain, right? The computer. It's still thinking, but you are leaving it. And in fact, some of the great saints of Christian tradition, Teresa of Avila, she could attain, well, eventually the highest stages that are possible to attain and the deepest stages of meditation that are attainable. She was graced into those places. And yet she would have a noisy mind when she went down into those places, and when she came back, her mind might still be thinking. So her brain never really shut off necessarily, but she just found this profound distance from her brain. And I also have that experience, not to her level of depth, but my experience is very similar. I don't quiet my mind to get into deep meditation. I leave it. It goes doing what it's doing, whatever it's doing, and it isn't really noisy these days. But I definitely have never really just stopped my mind from thinking through this approach. It's not the way it is. I leave it though. I leave it. It's thinking when I leave, and it's thinking when I come back sometimes. And that's so you're getting a distance from your mind. That's important because a lot of people will try so hard to control and quiet their mind that they stay in their mind when God is actually pulling that soul to the seat of the soul and maybe withdrawing the soul from the brain and the senses into itself alone might be a really good way of looking at that. So that third stage can be definitely, you might begin to say, I'm feeling God's presence. But you might still say, I'm not sure if it's God, but definitely my nervous system is quieted down. Definitely my mind has gotten quieter. There's distance there. If my eyes are closed, that depth of field is much deeper. And also in that stage, it's related to prayer in that you might have some aspirations for union that are felt and not thought. So a devotion that can arise that is quite deep, or a remorse and a mourning, or sometimes in there you could process some emotion. Painful emotion from past trauma can arise in that stage, but all of that is not the goal. The goal is, remember, if we make processing emotion the goal of meditation, we're no longer meditating. That always has to be an extra benefit that happens because of the one thing we're choosing, which is to come closer to God. And yes, sometimes emotion will process, but that's a second-hand benefit from the primary purpose of our meditation, which is to draw closer in intimacy to God. Okay, so then there's varying degrees of this, and at some point you get enough distance from your mind that it either did get quiet or you just can't hear it anymore. And now I would say you're entering into the fourth level of Christian prayer and meditation. And that fourth stage is people really like it. They're going to like it more than the previous three stages, because in the fourth stage, you are there's two ways it can go. One which is slightly disconcerting to people that are steeped in Eastern meditation approaches, and then one that is just people love, and they know God is touching them. God's been touching them all along, but now they know it, and they feel it, so they know it's true. So, which is, according to our schema, we don't know it's true when we feel it, but when you're in fourth stage prayer, you're feeling it, and you know it's true, and that's it. No one could trick you into thinking otherwise. Okay, so fourth stage is, there's two ways it can go. One, you're alert still, but very restful. You're definitely not asleep at all, but you're very, very rested. And, sometimes when you fall asleep, it's like you're falling. So I think that's why they call it falling asleep. And it's like you're sinking down. And in fourth stage, you've definitely sunken down out of third stage prayer. You're going deeper and deeper. And in fourth stage prayer, you definitely would start to feel sensations of energies running through your body, tingling. Often it wouldn't be uncommon at all. I mean, none of this has to happen, but it wouldn't be uncommon at all to feel love or peace or joy, very distinct qualities of God shining on you. You're definitely, you've left the world and the mind when you're in fourth stage prayer. It's dead center between the shallowest and the deepest. You're halfway in the world of spirit, might be the best way of describing it. And you're really getting somewhere now. Well, you have been all along. You've been in the stream of salvation the whole time. But you're noticing that more now is the best way to put it. But there's another way that it can manifest that bugs everybody and that people get very concerned about. And that's that you begin to fall into a sleep-like state. And there's just no way to comfort a person completely about this stage, depending on their personality type, because you are kind of falling asleep a little bit. I mean, you are. It's called spiritual sleep in Christian spirituality. That's what they call it. Well, the stage deeper than that is called spiritual sleep. And in the fourth stage, what Teresa of Avila says is that the soul can't tell when they come out of their meditation time. They cannot tell if they were asleep or meditating. Now, this is one of those areas where it's so hard to, you can't give specific advice to someone over a YouTube video. Hey, I know you're entering the spiritual thing and not actual sleep. There's no way I could know that. But if you're speaking to the person and you know them, you can tell. Are they hitting just a sleep state, or are they falling asleep in a meditative state? And that's probably the best way to describe it. So we're just now going to talk about people that are falling asleep in a meditative state. They don't know they are, and they worry about it. They're very concerned. They may even try really hard to stay out of that stage, but that actually only serves to bring them into third stage prayer or second stage prayer instead of fourth. It actually takes them back instead of deeper. And why would falling asleep in a meditative state be superior to staying awake? Well, if there is no God who knows and loves you and is trying to heal you, then there is no reason why, probably. I mean, there may be no reason why that would work if there's no God who is trying to heal you. But if you look at it from, let's say you're shining energy on somebody, and this energy is filled with states of being and goodness, all kinds of goodness from God. You say you're shining it on them with your hands. Couldn't you imagine if that person is thinking the whole time and they can't stop thinking, and they're thinking about their date and they're thinking about going grocery shopping, and they're thinking about their job, and they're worrying about their looks or whatever, you could see how maybe they're not absorbing as much peace, right? They're just not, because they're everywhere. They're all over the place. And then you could see how, as that begins to quiet, they would absorb more of it. And then just imagine they just kind of go to sleep for a few minutes. But you're still shining that power on them. Couldn't you sort of intuitively imagine why they might receive more power there in that state than when their mind is spinning? That's why. Now, someone might be saying, well, that third stage prayer seems like you could receive it well, but still notice it. And I think I could agree with that. But my experience is that you get more if you don't notice it. It's weird. It's like you're conscious enough to observe that it's happening, and that level of consciousness that is observing that it's happening or experiencing it happening is shallow. So all I can tell you is there's this other state that's more like a reboot for a computer, and it restarts everything from a totally different place. And that's what this stage is like. Now, from fourth to fifth stage prayer, which is actual true spiritual sleep, or really it's called absorption, a much deeper state of it. Somewhere along the line between here and there, which can take a number of years, the soul will have no confusion whatsoever about whether or not they're falling asleep. Fifth stage prayer, the prayer of absorption, is never mistaken for sleep. I mean, someone looking at you in it, they'll say you were asleep. My daughter says, "Dad, you're sleeping," even when I'm not. And it's funny. And it does, from the outside, your head's down, that person might be drooling on themselves. I mean, they look like they've fallen asleep. They're breathing deeply. But the inner experience of it is nothing like sleep at all. You don't slowly wake up, you come out. And sometimes it even feels like a pop. And then you're back to this world. And it feels like sometimes you really have come back to this world. And if it's true absorption at the deepest stage, I don't want to give someone the impression it always is like this, because it's just always varying degrees of depth, But if it's true absorption at the very deepest stages, the soul comes out with no memory whatsoever what has just happened, but knowing in a way that it shakes them, that is staggering, that they have been touched deeply by God's power. And if you said to them, you were just in God, you passed out, but you were totally in the presence of God during that state, they would say that makes sense based on how I am now that I've come out. That's the progression. And there are deeper stages than that, but I don't want to talk about them now because I doubt they're very relevant to people who are in the first 15 years of meditating. But there are two stages that are deeper than that are much more direct tastes of God, and you don't pass out. But I want to talk about this fourth and fifth stage because this is the fork in the road for the practicing Christian mystic. If you have read a bunch of books telling you to sit up very straight, no back behind you, no chair back behind you, so that you can remain highly alert, you won't enter these stages. You won't. They're available to those who let go and rest in God. And this is the whole, right here I think is the whole difference between Eastern and Western prayer and meditation. We believe and know that it is Christ's job to save us. We are not saving ourselves. We don't have to figure out how to get into union with God. We don't need to figure out how to overcome all of our issues so we can be in union with God. We don't need to know the way, and we don't need to be skilled enough to get there. What we need to do is we need to surrender enough and learn to rest deeply enough in God that God can do it in us and for us. And you just have to take that leap. And, this can be difficult without someone to talk to. So just know that you could set up some kind of a video call with me or a phone call to discuss these levels, because I've noticed people they're hesitant to trust, especially when it's stage 4 and they come out and they don't know the difference if they were sleeping or not. They can't tell. What I could tell you is if you're sincere and if you're doing it twice a day for at least 20 minutes, that's really the minimum, and you're dead serious about this, then even if you're falling asleep, God will make use of that. So it's even then, is it spiritual sleep or is it sleep? Well, I think of it as like it's just some spectrum between those. And sometimes it's very much spiritual sleep, and sometimes it might be a little more like sleep. But it doesn't matter. It really and truly doesn't matter if you really are giving a deep, sincere consent for God to change your life. And if up to the point of falling into spiritual sleep, you have been quite serious about your devotion and attention, right? Like you've really meant it. You didn't say, oh, I can't wait to go take this nap. I mean, meditate. You're not saying that. I really want to go meditate. And you really are turning to God in your heart and mind. If you fall into a sleep state while doing that, my guess, which is, my guess based on experience, is that almost certainly you're going into some degree of spiritual sleep. And that if that is your devotional attitude, each time you enter prayer, that sleep-like state will deepen over time and eventually enter fifth stage prayer, which you will not confuse with sleep. So, okay, I hope that this is helpful. This is a really important, just as an instructor that teaches meditation to people and who works with people from many backgrounds coming towards Christ, but from somewhere else. This is the one that it's difficult for them to trust. And also the one that, people from the East may sometimes criticize, but it's just because their system is so different and it's geared so differently that for them it really wouldn't work if they did it. Like they might even try it. Well, let me try it and see if it works. Well, it only works under a whole schema, right? It only works under a whole cloud of theology. And it only works under a cloud of power that can't come from Jesus Christ, the guru. So if Jesus is a guru, he loses 90% of his power. That's it. If Jesus Christ is an avatar for you, he loses 90% of his power. It can only come from a relationship with Christ that is based on God became a human being to save the human race, to save me and you. God became a human being, not a human being became a guru or became one with God through spiritual practices. That's what happens to us, right? We humans become one with God. That's what happens to us. We ascend to a place where we're one with God. We're not God, but we're one with God. Well, in Jesus, God descended down and became a human being. But it's even trickier than that because God became fully human, but also remained fully God. And that was a descension, right? I will go down and become fully human and really and truly be human while remaining fully God. There's this dual thing going on. That's nothing like a human being who reaches enlightenment. It's just not even in the same category. It's not even remotely in the same category. That's what Jesus is. If that's your Christ, right, the Christian Jesus, if Jesus is God, then, you receive something different when you come to him, right? That's the thing. There's an old Buddhist saying, which I'll ruin completely, that says if you go to the enlightened master and you think the enlightened master is a fool, you will leave with the blessings of a fool. And if you go to the enlightened master and you think the enlightened master is a very wise person, you will leave with the blessings of a very wise person. And you get the idea now, it's in ascending order. The more that you can see this person is, the more you can receive from them. Well, with Jesus, unless you can accept God incarnate, you don't receive almost any of him. You just receive a full-blown avatar or a full-blown guru, which is, you would say, well, that's a lot. Sure, it's a lot, but in comparison to what Jesus is, it's pitiful. It's just nothing. It's worse than nothing. It's a perversion of what he is. So, and that's the deal with Jesus, right? And for us as Christians, Jesus is God incarnate. God who became human for the purpose of salvation. You cannot understand a single word that Jesus says until you know who is saying it. You just can't. And this is not made up. This stuff is real. And it has real consequences, results that happen when you assent and accept these truths and come to see them for what they really are. So for us that know that Jesus is God incarnate, that is a completely different trajectory in our prayer life. It's just completely different. It is a trajectory that no guru has the authority or power to produce in us. It's not even in the ballpark. What the authority and power that Jesus has is complete and utter. You have to think, if Jesus is God incarnate, fully human and fully God, that's what it is. That's the marriage that takes place. Not, I don't want to belabor this point, but not a human who became one with God. That's different. That's totally different. Or an avatar a little further, I guess. That's great. I'll listen to any avatar. But I'll listen to them like I listen to any human who's super on fire. You listen to Jesus differently, very differently. It's a radical and profound difference. Because who is speaking, right? When Jesus speaks, is the one who invented you before you existed. Right? Who is speaking when Jesus speaks is the one who made up universes when there were no universes in existence. Who is speaking when Jesus speaks is the same being that is holding your soul in existence, right? Holding it in existence. That's who you're coming to in your prayer and meditation. And that's why it's okay to fall asleep in that presence. Lay up in it and rest in it and let it heal you, because it can do anything it wants in you. Because it has infinite power and infinite authority. That's going to make the Christian approach to prayer and meditation different. It just is. It is different. And it's going to make the stages of spiritual development different. And it's going to make the ways in which you respond to the stages different. Because you're dealing with a level of authority that for which there is no comparison. For which there is no analogy. There isn't one. And that faith, you've got to get that faith in you. You've got to get that and know that. You have to grow in that faith, because it's everything. It's everything. It's the shortcut. It's the way in for the unskilled. Jesus goes out and wants to throw a party, and the super successful never show up for it. In the scriptures, they almost never do. Once in a while, there's a wealthy person who's willing to be his disciple. But really, frankly, most of the time not. They're too busy out playing. They're having a bunch of fun in the world. They're having all their fun now. Jesus says, you had fun now. But what about my children that were starving? What about my children that were hungry? So when Jesus, gives these images of throwing this massive feast, who shows up? It's the broken and the wounded. And Christian theology ultimately says everyone's broken and wounded, but the broken and wounded notice. So everyone is, even the highly successful and busy, everyone's broken, but the broken and wounded notice they are. And they're the ones that show up for the feast. And it's God's job to make that person able to come into the light. It's God's job. It's God's healing and God's grace. That's the deal. That's the Christian deal. That's the covenant between Christ, between God and humanity. That it's not based on genetics, right? It's not based on social status. It's not based on education. I'm going to throw in some things. It's not based on numerology. It's not based on astrology. It doesn't matter. All of those things are completely irrelevant to grace. Grace works at a higher order. Right? If any of those, I'm not even saying I believe in astrology. My mother was an astrologer, so it's in my mind, even though I don't really believe in it, but it doesn't matter one way or another if you do or you don't. Just take anything you can think of that a human being might possess, intelligence, attributes, intuition, spiritual gifts, whatever you add to it, anything you could think of that you add to it. You take all that, and that stuff is irrelevant. It is irrelevant. It is a piece of dust in the midst of infinite power shining down. And it just doesn't matter. Good karma, bad karma, it doesn't matter. God's grace heals all peoples and will draw all peoples unto itself. That's the power of Christ. And that is what we're doing as Christian meditators. If you're a Christian and you're meditating, you need to not be reading Eastern books and then using that as a gauge for how it's going to unfold for you. It's not going to unfold like that. Oftentimes, they'll tell you to turn left when you should turn right. They're not wrong for their schema, for their approach, but it won't work for you. You need to be in the light of Christ, working within that power, under that theology, right? Under that worldview, under that spiritual view. It's in that context. It's in that environment that your path unfolds. And it unfolds in grace because of God's power, not yours. Because of God's ability, not your ability. Because of God's, infinite love, not your love. Because of God's faith, not your faith. We are infused with these attributes, and they become our own by participating in God's. And I know this was about meditation, but I want to just really quickly say there's something that might arise in you now as I say this. What might arise in you is this independent streak. Like, I don't want to need that extra help. That path that says you can do it on your own effort, that sounds more appealing to me. So if you have a car, okay, you have a car in the driveway. It's a nice, wonderful sports car, let's say. It's sitting in the driveway. If you're saying, I want to do this without God, I don't want to need all that extra help. I want to do this on my own power. This is exactly what it's like in a metaphor, okay? That's the same as that car saying, I'd like to not need gasoline. It really is. That's exactly what it's like. That's you saying, I'm a car, but I don't want to need gasoline. Or I don't want the driver. I just want it to be me alone. It isn't because if you had no sin whatsoever, no disorder whatsoever, you would be in no less need of God's power. Any more so than a light bulb would not be in need of electricity. It is by design that you need God's power dwelling in your soul. It's not a mistake. It's not a concession because of your brokenness. You were created to participate in the divine energies. So never think of it as, oh, this Christian way, it's like great, but you need special helps. First of all, everyone needs special helps, but it isn't the point. The point is all those special helps are there to help you get to a place you were created to be in the first place. We are not independent beings. We're interbeings, right? Heaven is the soul finally fully consenting its will to God, so there's no barrier whatsoever, so that God's power is given permission to dwell fully in the soul, so that soul becomes another kind of being, right? Sons and daughters of light. So heaven is you living in full and profound union and intimacy with God. And then because God and you are in as intimate a union as is possible, then also now, because God isn't just in you, God's in everyone else, you are now in union with everybody, right? In some general way, participating in all the wonder and beauty of and isness of these other created beings. And since God is in all the empty spaces between beings, you're there too. And you're participating in some way with that, sharing information with that. And also just all the stars and planets around, God's in all that. So you're in that too. This sort of notion, I want to be independent, do it all myself, that maybe exemplifies in a perfect way the problem. That is the fall from grace. We're living in union with God. What if I do something on my own? Fall from grace. You're not supposed to be doing it on your own. You weren't designed for it. It's a complete misunderstanding at best. It's arrogance at worst. We're meant to come in through God's grace. That's the point. You're not a special case that needs all this special help. I mean, some of you might be, I am a little. But in general, the notion of grace, it isn't just for special cases. It's like God saying, could I restore you to the order that was my ideal about what it means to be human? Because you guys are not being fully human, you're being fragmented humans. Fully human is you dwelling and basking in my power and participating in my qualities and in union through love with one another, because I am in all things, holding all things together. Grace, this grace way in, it isn't a special case way in. It's the way. It's the way it really is. According to Jesus, who might know what he's talking about. I mean, the monk that I go to see says, if Jesus said it, it's not just an opinion. See, he's speaking from the heart of the heart, right? On an avatar's very best day, that person, man or woman, cannot comprehend Jesus. Jesus is a different category. Something else. Okay. Thanks for watching the videos. From now on, I am posting below. People wrote in asking if there's a way to donate. So there's Venmo and there's also PayPal. And I do accept donations. I'm grateful for anything people give. And I also appreciate if you like and subscribe. I wouldn't mind if the channel grew a little bit to reach more people. And you're also welcome to share these videos with anyone you like. We're finding that it's helping in the way that people might have been too afraid to come to a class, or they live in another city or or state, and they can't. But some people are afraid to come in, and you don't know what it's like. What are these people going to be like? They say they're serious about God. I know my impression would be, well, if they say they're really serious about God, they're just all going to be really arrogant and cocky and think they're better than everyone, right? Like that's the fear. Or I'm not good enough, all these fears people have. We're noticing that the videos help because you get a feel for the flavor. And it's like, oh, okay, these are just people, right? This guy's Clint, he's just this guy. Just this dude who's doing this. It's not elitist, right? Nothing to be intimidated by. So you're welcome to share these with people, please do. And thanks everyone very much.